So the scale of immigration that they would have to encourage and allow is more than the total mobile population of the world at the moment. They would have to grab every would-be migrant from everywhere, and the only country that might be able to provide enough ballast to help the Chinese out with that would be India, the country that arguably is the most hostile to the very concept of cooperation with the Chinese on anything.
Mhm.
If you had told me this or asked me this 4 years ago, I probably would have broadly agreed, but wow, times change. The Donald Trump administration, there were a lot of things about them that I was not thrilled at, but the need to rebalance the relationship with China was definitely something that needed to be done, and it's been continued under Biden.
Mm.
COVID turned a lot of people in the United States off on all things Chinese, especially when it became apparent that the Chinese knew about the bug and had prevented flights from originating in Wuhan landing anywhere else in China, but they still allowed international flights.
Right.
I mean, that was a dick move. There's no way around that. The Chinese going into this wolf warrior diplomacy pissed off everyone, and now pretty much every foreign academic center in the entire Western world has been shut down. All those Confucian institutes are gone. So I don't mean to suggest that there's nothing residual out there, but just the mass cultural rejection of all things Chinese government related, and with the Chinese taking steps to make it much worse than it needed to be, I'm really not concerned about that anymore. I mean, there's a competition going on in Congress who can be more anti-Chinese. This is not the sort of situation that I'm overly concerned about foreign influence, especially since the Chinese have been so ham-fisted about it. It's very easy to root this out, and it's being rooted out quite aggressively. I'd say we're well past 80% at this point. Well, just to think that what the Chinese want is to be able to dictate everyone to accede to their security and economic preference, but with absolutely no reciprocal action. They really have started drinking their own Kool-Aid, so to speak. Part of it's a government thing that comes up with every generation or two of China. The country is very large. It's very diversified in terms of worker quality and geography. And as a result, the central government been able to exact its writ throughout the entire territory has always been a problem. There's always been this struggle between regional power centers and national. Unfortunately, they've never been able to find a balance. Either the regional power centers overwhelm the center and the country splits apart into warring fiefdoms, that's most of their history, or the center succeeds in reining in the local ones and it becomes a dictatorship in which all dynamism and all creativity is destroyed in favor of a cult of personality. And that's where we are now. So Xi has executed or exiled or imprisoned pretty much everyone in the country who's capable of independent thought at this point. And we're not seeing any flexibility in policy, and all of the bureaucrats have now fallen into one of two categories. Number one, the ones who won't do anything unless they are told in writing, and so we have stasis, or those who hear about something that Xi said on TV or saw it on a billboard, and they go into their own zealotous interpretation of what they think the boss wants, and they go a little batshit. So, for example, you have seen undoubtedly the armies of people in hazmat gear spreading lime on highways and airport runways. That's obviously idiotic, but that's what policy looks like in China now. And so they're just hitting their head over and over into the wall until something cracks, and that something is not going to be the United States. Yeah, there's a lot of if-then statements wrapped up in that question. There's a robust historical database in China of how everything can go to hell very, very quickly
Sure.
for internal reasons.
Yeah.
And because of the demographic situation, we know that their consumption and export model can't survive the decade. They just don't have the people to even attempt it. But that doesn't mean that demographics is what's going to put the bullet in the head. It could be an energy crisis. It could be a food crisis. It could be government collapse. It could be Xi slipping in the shower and falling on some bullets. You have to understand, though, is that there's no way out of this where
Right.
China survives. Now, an entity this large, how it dies matters,
Sure.
but the biggest impact we are likely to see in the Western Hemisphere is the sudden loss of manufactured goods. And that is something, while painful, that we can adapt to. The loss of, or the disruptions to energy and agricultural markets, I don't think are things that we would feel all that heavily here. We have a largely self-contained system. Well, let's start long and work to short term. So longer term, Halliburton, Schlumberger, BP, all the super majors, all the oil companies of the West have left. The Russians don't have the technical skill to operate most of their own fields, especially the further east and the further north you go. So we know long term that at least half of Russian output is going to fall off. Now, whether that's in 3 months or 3 years or 10 years, I don't know.
Are there
We've never had this degree of technical divorce before.
are there not other technical workers that could fill their spot, like Chinese or Saudis that know how to get oil out of the ground?
Nope. If the Chinese could do it themselves, they would be doing it already. And the Saudis rely on the West as well. Also, Saudi fields are not nearly as complicated as what's going on in Russia. Also, the Saudis don't work. They bring in foreigners to do it for them. So they wouldn't know where to begin.
Okay.
The best guess is over the course of the first month, output dropped by between 1 and 1.5 million barrels a day, but that has steadily been built back. And best guess is they are within arm's reach of where they started. What has happened is the Europeans, whether it's because of sanctions or boycotts, aren't buying Russian crude. So the Russian crude has to get loaded into small tankers on their western periphery. There has to be a sea-to-sea transfer at some point where it gets loaded onto a larger vessel that can then make the trip to East Asia and South Asia. India is the country that is by far buying more and has almost single-handedly made up for the oil shipments that used to go to Europe. That's the debate going on within Germany right now, is how much pain can they take and how much can it be concentrated. So German industry does not work like the United States. The United States has a very diversified system, and we're relatively agnostic about where we get our various inputs, and most of our inputs do come from within the North American system or even the American system. But Germany has to import all of its raw materials that aren't coal, and natural gas specifically is the basis of the system. In Germany, they bring in the natural gas. Some is used for power, but the majority of it is used for heavy industry in order to make chemicals and plastics and industrial base materials. Those base materials are not exported. They are then used within Germany to make their heavy manufacturing and their medium manufacturing, which then they use to make their light manufacturing. So it all has the same base. And if that energy flow stops, there is no alternative. And even if the Germans succeed in bringing in stuff from elsewhere, whether it's piped gas from the North Sea or liquefied natural gas from the Western Hemisphere, it will be at a much, much higher price point. The Germans are already paying about 6 to 8 times for their natural gas now that they were at the start of the war. And so the entire German manufacturing model is already under duress and might not be economically viable. If they don't take the cheap stuff that's nearby, that can't be redirected. You have to have a pipeline for that, and that takes years. So you're looking at Russian natural gas in this environment potentially just falling off the market, in which case the Germans see prices go up by that much more. So this, even if it succeeds, you're looking at a massive hit to German industry. Now, the Russians can make it worse, and Nord Stream is where that factors in. So on the 11th of July, the Russians shut it down. They say it's going to be back after maintenance on the 22nd. We will see. But on July 17, the Russians declared force majeure on the entire pipeline. That's not a maintenance question. They're saying that, nope, we just can't meet contracts at all. What they're trying to do is pull Germany out of the NATO coalition on Ukraine. And since Germany is the home of the major logistic hubs that Americans use to get stuff further east, without Germany, there is not a war in Ukraine that we can support.